Okay, so let's talk about opacity. So we're going to go over three different types of things you would normally use when it comes to opacity in opacity masks. Uh, First, let me go and make a material, and we'll first talk about opacity mask. So we'll do prop underscore om for opacity mask, and then underscore mmat, just because we want to make a master material out of this guy. Let me bring him over to this screen. And then you're going to see that these two features, that you would plug your nodes into, opacity and opacity mask, are gray right now. And that's because we don't have it turned on, because naturally for things like opaque masks, or sorry, for opacity masks, you need to have your surface turned from opaque to either masked, translucent, or even additive. But we're not going to go over additive right now. Let's go on with masked. Let's see. Now, I have a very simple logo mask right here. It's the UE4 logo, and it is black and white. Actually, technically it's color, but of course you can just change that to grayscale, and that should solve the issue. Also, let's go in here and let's change its compression type to grayscale. This way it cuts out a lot of the overhead that a normal RGB texture would have. So let me delete that and bring him in again. And now he looks normal. And now we're only going to need like the red channel, or we can do RGB just so we can have this grayscale. But we'll just plug it in to our opacity mask. And then you're going to see it looks kind of weird now. Let me change our preview mesh. And you see that now it's cut out in the shape of the UE4 logo. That's because how opacity works is for the color of white, whatever the object is that's white is opaque. So it will render. And then whatever is black won't be rendered. This allows you to have things that are cut out. You can use them for foliage. You can use it for graffiti, for anything that needs to be just cut out and you don't need to have it rendered. People also even use it for decaling small metal like rivets, vents, any other thing to have as like floating geometry instead of you having to model it out. In some cases, depending on what your pipeline is, you can throw all these little things on there, and it's cheaper to have that than to have more polygons to render. So I'll show you also with a 1 minus what it looks like if I invert it too. Ta-da! So that's how opacity mask works. Let me show you just how the opacity works. Because we have, actually no, we'll just keep doing with the opacity mask one. Normally when you're going to have these kinds of master materials, especially for like props and stuff, you'll have designated different master materials for different things, because you don't want to have every single one of these materials that you're making automatically have translucency, opacity, all that stuff turned on, because it's really expensive and sometimes you don't need it because it might be redundant. So let me change this to translucent now. And of course it turns black because it's not, it turns off opacity mask slot. And now let's plug that into our opacity. And as you can see, it looks the same, honestly. But also, you'll notice that we don't have metallic, specular roughness, or anything like that. Right now, we can only use color, emissive, opacity, and then like ambient occlusion and stuff. That's because So what transparency is, it's different than a masked opacity, where this one actually uses the grayscale values to transition between the values. So if I say I open this back up into Photoshop, and let me just throw a filter on here, some blur, Gaussian blur, and you can see that now there's more than just white and black. There's these gray values that transition from that blur value. So let's hit save as, and let's throw him on there. Boom. Save off. And then let me go here and hit re-import. And now we have a blur between the two of them. Let's see. I'm not sure if you notice it, but you can see this small gradiating transition. That is the start of it. I mean, if we really wanted to, let's just, oops, sorry. We'll do a clamp node. Bring him in. And let's bring our min value up to say like a 0.3. We're going to bring up all that black value to a gray value. And you can see now we have this kind of differentiation between our values. We have something that's not completely visible. It's kind of somewhat see-through in a sense. It's like glass. Because since what I did was I brought up all the black values to this kind of more of a lighter gray, it's rendering the betweens. So if we want to say like, hey, we want to turn this into maybe like a glass, like an actual painted glass with like a decal or something on it. So we don't have our roughness and our metallic values right now. So what we need to do is we'll click on our material node and we'll go down, and now there's this translucency area. Here are different values of how you can handle translucency, because translucency is a very tough subject. It's basically how light and other factors will permeate through this material. So right now it's non-directional. So this is for things like, say, dust or smoke that don't really have a reflectance value per se. We'll bring this down to a surface translucency volume. This brings back our roughness and our metallic values. Let's hit apply. Actually, I'm gonna go delete this one minus value. Let me plug him into our base. Oh. Now why are we not getting this? Let me create an instance of this guy, drag him in here. There we go. Okay, so we're just having a weird loading issue. Yeah, so sometimes Unreal Engine can be a little finicky. Be very wary. So before you get into panic mode and kind of start trying to debug what you just did, try and apply to an object, hit save, maybe even close the engine, turn it back on. You know, turning off and on always seems to be the thing. Also, one thing to also note, it's always been a weird thing. When you have something that is only translucent, like say this plane, once it loses its translucence, or once it has translucency to it, you can't grab it. It's a weird thing in Unreal Engine. I still don't know how to fix, but you have to make sure you know where it is and you select it inside the world outliner, because it's such a very weird bug. But now that it's working and we can see, let's add some value to it. Since, you know, we want to turn this into a type of glass, let's throw in a metallic value, and let's throw in a roughness value. Let's convert to a parameter, metallic, and roughness. Saving. Now let's go into our instance values. Turn these bad boys on. Let me kind of go to the side a little bit. You actually can kind of see a little bit that we actually do have some type of value. It's actually creating shine. You can actually see right here where this highlight is. Even here, actually in the preview, you can see it's almost like a little bubble. If you want to, you can start bringing in your metallic values. And also you got to make sure you note, because we don't really have any differentiation, we're literally turning on all metallic value. So since this asset here in the middle has it's completely opaque in that sense, it's going to be completely metallic. So we now have a very shiny and a very very smooth surface. So it's literally going to mirror whatever it's going to see. Actually, let me go in here and I'm going to break off and make a min opacity value. Make sure it's a parameter first. Min opacity value. Ay, such a bug. There we go. Min opacity value. Perfect. Apply. Save. So we now have this very shiny and very reflective UE4 logo. And actually, let me do one more thing also. Because it's taking all its color value coming from this UE4 logo. If maybe we want to actually change the color too. Let's throw in a vector 3, convert to parameter, albedo, tint. One. Okay, now we have our tint values. So let's go in here and throw some red on it. White, for some reason, I think I've always said it before when it comes to the color of white. A lot of assets in here are very bright anyway. So when you have white on a very bright background, you're not going to see any values. So throw in a random color just for testing. So we have our min opacity value. So let's start bringing it up, and you can actually start seeing that it's getting darker and darker, but it's still translucent. More translucency means we can actually see more of our like reflectance values. Let me make this completely rough. Let's do 50%. Let's do that. So let's just make it very glossy and non-metallic. Because the problem you also get is when you make something like this metallic, or all metallic in a sense, it dampens your albedo. So you have a hard time sometimes trying to see this value when you have your metallic values are really, really high. So let's turn it off. And now we actually have a very glossy glass. We have here, what we have right here basically is a very simple glass. If you were to use this with, say, a mesh, like a wood frame or something, like we can use that painted wood. We can make a little window and stuff out of this. And of course, if you want to, you can of course take out the UE4 logo and just apply just a value. Like I can turn that guy off and just take it out and then change it to just opacity. There we go. And now everything is translucent. It's not just we have one opaque logo in the middle. But we're going to do one more thing to make this more expensive but more realistic glass. And that is, you're going to see we have this little refractionary node right here. Glass has one other major property. It's, I wonder if I can, let me do a new browser. Glass refraction. You may have noticed it possibly, when you look at something inside of a glass, like an actual glass or glass cup, better way to put it. You see that when you bring something in like this and you put it through, like, say, water and also glass, you see that it refracts in a very weird way. And you can also see it if you have like a prism, how basically glass and translucent materials all have a different, what people would call refractionary point or refractionary value, that basically bends light around in a special type of degree. Glass, because it's so smooth and rounded, you would have it with Fresnel. So it usually happens around most of the edges. So you see here and here that it kind of bends in a very odd way, and that's usually where your eyes pick up to the point in the middle. So we're going to do that with Fresnel as well. So we're going to have the edges affected. So we have a refraction node output here. We're going to add a Fresnel function, or Fresnel. Fresnel function and Fresnel are literally the more or less the same thing, but this actually gives you way more. It's the more complex value if, say, you have a technical thing when it comes to your player, how you want light to reflect in certain values with your normal functions, and or also with how your player's camera views things from certain angles. Because as a player, if you're a third person player, you're going to see glass differently than someone who's in their first person view. So you'd have these different types of vectors and values affected using either like what's on the screen or just what the camera collects. But simply, we're going to do just the Fresnel node. So we're going to start plugging in some value here and here. Let's actually convert this to a parameter. Strength. And you're going to see what I mean in a bit once this saves. Okay, so now we have our Fresnel, and looks normal. Whatever you see through this glass looks exactly the same as what you see outside of this glass. Let's do 8.1. You can automatically see the glass is actually refracting when you look right through it. So you can see that there's a disconnect from what is currently here in the scene and what's shown through the glass. This is that exact value I was telling you about, where the light from in the scene and also how your camera's perception is going to affect how you view this. From certain crazy angles, you may not see it because of there's a term for it. It's basically almost like your screen space values. There's a degree where the fall off completely stops, like right here, because we're getting so close to just how flat the value is. You're not going to see it, but when you have it head on like this, you'll see how it's way stronger. Bring this up to like 0.2 maybe, or even 0.5. You may have also noticed in the node that there's a normal plugin, and this is to say you might have a. I have this noise here. Actually, no, I can't use that noise. I need to have a normal map. We'll do this granite. We'll make this like a texture type of glass, and plug this into our normal. Set apply and save and show you what I mean. The reason why we have this normal value is when you have a texture to glass like frosted glass or even the decorative glass you see like on chairs and stuff, it's supposed to react in a way where you kind of get a distortion to what you're seeing. So if you ever had like a very decorative door and there's like a little glass window and it's got texture to it, you're not going to perfectly be able to see right out of it. You kind of see this weird kind of mumbled version of it. This is what it is, because if you have say your normal, we'll plug this in. There's our normal value right here. And if I unplug it, hit save, you notice we're going to get the light hit off of the normal, but we're not going to have the distortion that we want from the glass, which is going to look kind of odd and actually kind of weird. Like, you still see how the light is going to refract, but it's basically taking the whole entire surface into account and not the actual normals. So of course it is going to distort it, but it looks very weird because you're only getting the light hits, but you're not getting the distortion that it needs. So let me go back and do like say a 0.1, even also 0.04, and you'll see right off the bat, you can see what I'm talking about, where you see the value, but you only get your light hits here, but you don't get the light hits that we're supposed to get. It almost looks like the window's dirty than it being an actual textured asset. So when we plug back in that normal value into the Fresnel, it's allowing the material to know, hey, we have something here that is reflecting this light value from the normals vector, because how normal maps work is it detects how light is going to reflect off of a certain asset based off of these values. So you're actually going to see a difference. And let me plug our really high vector in again. And you'll see that we still have our values, but it's actually, instead of making more jumbled and look kind of disgusting, more or less, you actually are now getting the reflection how it naturally should look and how it realistically should look. Instead of it just taking into account the entire asset, it's actually taking into account the normal itself as well. But also be aware when you are making something like this that maybe having something like Fresnel in it might be a little expensive. Always be aware of how many instructions you have when it comes to this value. So right now we have, say, 324. If I was to say, let's get rid of our Fresnel and just keep, like, say, our normal map to it. Set save and let it kind of think a little bit. We get a little bit of a performance back, but once we have, say, multiple assets that are using this, because say we only have one type of glass and this is that glass used throughout the entire game. Say, sorry, let me grab the plane. Let's drag a couple. You may have noticed it was a very small number that changes on it, but the thing is that performance is going to change more from here than anything else. So, sorry, plane 2. When you have something like this where you have glass, looking through another glass, looking through another glass, this is where the performance is going to hit, because your camera has this vector known as depth, like Z depth, and it points this invisible line and it has to render all of these things. And, just looking through this, it's simple, it's easy to do. But if you have 4 of these, that's when you're going to have a problem. And I'm going to show you how to see that problem. So in your optimization view modes, let's go to shader complexity. It's going to compile all our shaders. You'll see this is green because we don't have anything crazy. We have something like this, which is your transparency material, which it's always going to look bad, unless you change some things like, let's find our material again. Where did it go? Not our Quebec glass base one. Is it in materials? Oh, no, I'll just grab this one. Okay, so, that's why, because it was invisible technically. So if I start changing some things like, say, let's change our translucency back to that non-directional one where we don't have any of those other values per se. Hit save again. We're going to get a better performance hit. This is honestly the cheap version of it. So this basically will just allow you to have simple, just kind of color tinted glass. But if you want to have, say, like refractive values and all these other things that make glass realistic, this is what I'm talking about. This makes it a lot cheaper. But you also see the fact that when I look through all of these guys at the same time, this one, it's getting 2 hits. This one's getting 3. And then right here, when you see this one corner, this is the 4th hit, because it's also having to try and blend the ground as well. It's very tough. So these are some things you need to be aware of. We're going to talk more about this later on when we start getting into foliage, because foliage is very hard to do. And, glass, you have, say, a couple of these things. Foliage, you'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of plants that use this type of alpha. And this is called overdraw. You have to be very aware of how you handle transparency and opacity, because you're going to have these kinds of performance problems, and you don't want the tech department and engineering to call you up and say, hey, buddy, we got some performance hits, and it's your problem now. So that's an over-under basic of opacity masks, and translucency, and how there's going to be different types of translucent materials.